This morning, as we come to look at stories we know by heart, I want to take just a second and thank you for being a part of my story, a part of my family's story, and to tell you that you will always be a part of our hearts. Winnie the Pooh perhaps said it the best. He said, "How lucky I am to have something that makes saying goodbye so hard." Thank you. And it does indeed make saying goodbye hard when you have experienced the love of Germantown United Methodist Church. Thank you. It indeed has been a good story. And everybody loves a good story. The best books are those that we read, and then after we've finished reading them, we want to know what else happened. We find that we're still thinking about the scenes and the characters days after we've finished the book, and we're wondering about the characters' motivations and what we would have done if we had been in their place. One scholar writes, "Storytelling is a process that has the power to transform hearers and tellers, as well as the world in which they live. Stories are identity shapers. Using biblical stories can help us identify God and come to know who God is." The whole Bible is a story, and when we come to know the story, it shapes us. We think about the characters and their motivations and about what we would have done if we had been in their place. But the truth is, we as a society, we as a people, are not taking full advantage of the power of the biblical story. In 2013, Barna Research Group conducted research on biblical literacy. They found that almost half of Americans agree that the Bible contains all that a person needs to know to live a meaningful life. And they found that over half believe that the Bible has too little influence on our society today. Yet, they also found that we don't know much about the Bible. It's not that we don't have Bibles. 88% of American households have a Bible, and those almost all have 4 or 5 Bibles. But fewer than half of us can name the 4 Gospels. Many Christians can't identify more than 2 or 3 of the disciples. 60% of Americans can't name 5 of the 10 commandments. So how is it that our life is shaped by this story if we don't know it? George Gallup and Jim Castelli put it this way: Americans revere the Bible, but by and large they don't read it. And because they don't read it, they have become a nation of biblical illiterates. The problem is, if we don't know the Bible, how can it influence us? Who we are is a people of the story. We read the Bible to learn who we are and whose we are. We commit the stories to heart so that when we're in the midst of the storm, they come to us and give us hope and give us strength to endure. We commit the stories to heart so that we move from what happened in that story again to what does it mean for me? Because then those stories are able to shape us. Well, the story of Zacchaeus is one of those stories that I dare say we probably all know by heart, thanks to a children's song. I was in the kitchen the other day, and the rest of the family was in the den, and I decided I was going to play a little game, and I started singing the song. He climbed up in a baobab tree. I sang it just to see if anybody was actually listening to me. I thought it was a sycamore tree I heard from the den. We know the story. We know the details of the story. And because we know the story, we're able to dig a layer deeper and ask what that story means to us. We don't have to spend our time on the details of once there was a man from Jericho who wanted to see Jesus when Jesus came through town, but he was short and he couldn't see Jesus, and no one in Jericho liked him. And so he climbed up in a sycamore tree so that he could see. And right now you're thinking, yeah, and he was a wee little man, right? Zacchaeus couldn't see because of the crowd. Even if he was not short, I imagine the crowd would not have let him very close to Jesus. He was not well liked. And there was quite a crowd gathered. The road was a busy road anyway there through Jericho, and it was almost Passover. And Jericho was the major route that people went from Galilee to Jerusalem. Jesus was traveling for Passover from Galilee to Jerusalem with the Jewish pilgrims, and he was getting to be something of a celebrity. And people were crowding around him, and as he walked along the road, people were catching up with him and staying with him. And so he had quite an entourage coming along the road there. A lot of people were hopeful. He'd done a lot of signs, the miracles that he had performed. Maybe he really was the promised Messiah. It was no wonder that Zacchaeus couldn't see Jesus. The crowd must have been elbow to elbow, and so in desperation he ran ahead and he climbed up a tree. And as I think about Zacchaeus being kept from seeing Jesus, I wonder, what keeps us, you and me, from seeing Jesus? What stands in our way? And as I imagine that scene, I'm humbled, because I know there are a lot of things that stand in my way. And one of them is, would I be willing to climb up a tree to see him? What about you? How badly do you want to see Jesus? Do you look for him? Do you come to worship expecting to experience his presence? Do you put yourself on the path of the poor? Do you sit down and talk with people who are hurting? Do you go out on a limb and take a chance on somebody who's struggling? Do you see Jesus in the eyes of the person who's looking for food or clothes or a safe place to rest? As I imagine him running out in front of the crowd and climbing the tree, I wonder, am I willing to run out in front of the crowd? How badly do I really want to see Jesus? Badly enough to risk people whispering about me? Badly enough to overcome my shortcomings? To swallow my pride? Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector. He was the regional manager of tax collectors underneath him. For the occupation, he was a traitor. They had to be whispering, what is he doing? He is one of those who's going to get what's coming to him when the Messiah comes and takes power. He should be ashamed to be out here. He has cheated us all. And look at him. He hasn't cared about us. He hasn't cared about his people. He hasn't stood up for us. In fact, he's not only enforced the law, but he has taken advantage of us for his own gain. And now this man who has squashed us and come and taken our power and our money away from us and cheated us, now he comes and tries to see this rabbi who is the only hope we have of getting out from underneath this oppression. Would you or I risk running ahead of the crowd and climbing up a tree? And Jesus calls out when he sees him, "What are you doing up there?" They had to be thinking, yeah, what is he doing out there? He ought to be at home hanging his head in shame. He ought to be afraid because this rabbi is coming to set things right. He's a sinner. He's a traitor. He's a cheat. He's taken advantage. He's kicked them when they were down, and he's laughed in their faces when they begged for mercy. Come here, Jesus calls, and they all go, yeah, go. Because I must be your guest. With those words, it was worth the climb. Come to me, says Jesus, because I must be your guest. Zacchaeus was a wee little man in every way. Very possibly the most hated man in Jericho. And Jesus saw him up in that tree. Now, these sycamore trees are great big mushroom-shaped trees. They're about 60 feet tall when they're full grown, and they have these great big, thick, dark leaves. He's hidden in the foliage. And Jesus sees him, and he breaks down every barrier. I am coming to your house, and we are going to eat together. When we dig just below the surface in this story, we see that God's love is for everyone, even for this man who cheated his friends, who was a traitor to his people, and who got rich on the backs of his kinfolk. Zacchaeus worked for the occupation, and he made sure his nest got feathered in the process. And Jesus extended God's love and grace to him. Wow, that works on me. God's love and grace extends to everybody, even the people who commit awful crimes, abusers, cheats, people so self-centered that they don't care who they hurt as long as they get what they want. God's love extends to everyone, even me, even you. Even when we're self-centered, even when we fail, even when we hurt someone. Jesus looked up and he saw Zacchaeus and he knew his heart. He wanted to see Jesus. He was curious, but he wasn't devout. He wasn't repentant. And Jesus met him right where he was, right there on the side of the road, and says, I must be your guest. The most hated man in Jericho, who had by all rights earned his reputation, and Jesus meets him where he is and comes to be his guest. Now, the next part of the story isn't in the song, so it might not be as familiar, but it's very important. Zacchaeus stands up from the table and says, look, Lord, here and now I give half of everything I have to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. When Zacchaeus sits at table with Jesus, he is changed. He gives it up. He becomes generous. He's going to give half of everything he has, and then 4 times what he's cheated back. Keep in mind that he was able to overtax everybody, because all Rome required was that he tax everybody what Rome needed and wanted. But he could overtax, and he got to keep whatever he overtaxed and just send to Rome what Rome was owed. And he was wealthy, we are told. And then he decides to make restitution. But that restitution is way more than what was required. If he wanted to make restitution, what was required of him when he repented was to return what he had taken unfairly and 1/5 in addition. And what does he decide to give? 4 times. When Zacchaeus sat at the table with Jesus, he truly was changed. He repented. He saw the needs of the poor and he responded. He wanted not just to make restitution, but to be generous. His heart had changed. What a story. Zacchaeus was a wee little man. He had a lot of shortcomings. But he climbed up in a tree because he wanted to see Jesus. And it's a great story because if we're honest with ourselves, every one of us is so much like him. We have a lot of shortcomings too. So the question is, how badly do you want to see Jesus? Because he sees you. He knows all about you and loves you just like you are. And he invites you to his table to be his guest and to receive his grace. It's at this table that we remember his story. May we, as we meet Jesus, truly repent like Zacchaeus did. May we see the needs of the poor and respond. May we not only set things in our life right, but be abundantly generous and loving in response to God's love. When we meet Jesus, may our hearts be changed. Amen.